that'll bring us into our one of our final talking points, which I mean second to final one, which is getting guests. And this could probably be another podcast. I say that so fucking much. I should stop saying that as often as I do. This could be a whole another podcast. But getting guests is it's important, but I don't want to stress it so much that you lose sight of the heart of your podcast, you
Hmm.
know?
Yeah,
Because go ahead.
I was gonna say, well, like the last two ones go kind of hand in hand. We have a social media and then getting guests, and I think the easiest way to get a guest is through social media. You know what I mean? Unless you have like a mutual contact, um, and along with just getting guests, I would only get guests if it helps your podcast. You know what I mean? Because the guests that we've had so far, we find interesting to us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's why we were, oh, let's give them a platform to tell their story to not just us, but to everyone that's listening. But if you have like a podcast where it's like learning how to farm, you don't really need a guest for that. You know what I mean? Especially if it's a farmer talking, he just tells you what to do. But we like to talk about things that are interesting to us.
Mhm.
So we'll have people who own gyms, or we'll have people who worked in prisons, and we just think that's like cool and like interesting. So that's how we decided to have guests.
I agree. I mean, even though guys like that you didn't mention, we've had several guests, and
Yeah.
all of them have an individual story that we found to be interesting on some level, you know. And you can say, well, it's because they had a following that's larger than ours, and you're not wrong. But the reason that we found them is because of their following, and then
Yeah.
then we found them interesting, you know.
Hmm.
So yes, they had a following, but we wouldn't. There's people that have a huge following that we have no interest in having on the show, you know.
Exactly. Yep. That's a great point.
So it's got to be. You have to find the person genuinely interesting. Otherwise, it's going to be a shit interview and a
Yeah.
shit episode, you know.
Yeah. I always try to get guests that I feel like I'd be friends with in real life. You know what I mean?
Yeah, every
Keep.
single one of our guests I could totally shoot the shit with and have a beer with, you know.
Hmm. For
So
sure.
make sure that I mean sometimes it's good radio if you and the guest don't mesh well and you get in an argument or whatever. I've seen like talk shows where that seems to happen and they get a lot of views. I don't really tend to enjoy that, but
Yeah.
I mean I it's kind of clickbaity on like, you know, news anchor blows up at guest blah blah blah. I mean
Yeah.
I get that that's a thing, but just also make sure that if something like that does happen on your show, that could possibly define your podcast, and then you just become known as the podcast that this happened on, you know,
Yeah.
and then no one cares about the rest of your content.
Hmm. Like your podcast gets labeled as like someone that's trying to get you on there to kind of like a gotcha podcast. You know what I mean? Just
Hmm.
wants to like incite like a fight for views.
Yeah, and I mean if that's your thing, whatever, but it's definitely not ours,
Yeah.
you know. So, but yeah, and with the guest thing, don't be afraid to reach out because the worst that's going to happen is they don't respond.
Exactly. And
So
then like I don't think anyone would be mad at you for asking. You know what I mean? Because you're
yeah,
you're
and
literally
if you're
just saying like,
polite,
hey,
especially.
yeah. Because the way we go about it is like, hey, we love what you're putting out. You know what I mean? If they're a YouTuber or like a musician, we'll say like we love what you're like putting out. We have a podcast and we'd love to have you on. You know what I mean? Kind of talk to you about like maybe your journey to where you got to where you are now, or like the process of making a video. And like usually they'll say like, yeah, I'm sure, like why not? Because a podcast is easier than like making a collaborative video where we're
Mhm.
just like we're it's like a hangout. You know what I mean? We're just chilling right now and like just talking. Um,
We're taking the work out of their hands too, because they don't
exactly.
have,
Yeah.
like you said, it's not a video where they have to record, cut, and then send us something. It's like it's just a phone call, you know. So I think it's easier to get podcast guests than it is to like collaborate video wise.
Hmm.
And it should say something. You should say like it's not like, hey, dude, I have a podcast. Come on. You should say
Yeah.
like, hey, I found you this way. Like what you're doing, especially this video, or I liked what you said, blah, blah, blah. So they know that you're legit watching their content and you value them. You don't just say, hey, I want you on this podcast. Because then they're like, oh, they're just wanting me on to build a following,
Yeah.
which isn't untrue necessarily. Like, yes, I want you on because you have a following partially, but I also genuinely find you interesting because I
Yeah.
watched this episode. You know what I mean?
Yeah. For
Like,
sure. I mean,
it's not untrue. Like,
yeah.
yes, I do want you on partially because of your following, but like, again, there's people with huge followings that I would never want on the show because it would just be, I just couldn't make it work. You know,
Hmm.
I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, them having a following is more of like a benefit. We never seek out because of their following. We mostly seek out because like they're interesting. But if they also have a following, it's also kind of like a it's a plus. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It gives us more of a chance for people to find us through them on their side.